G'day everyone, NotJah here with another Atheist Flashbacks. Here with Jen from Jen's Little Corner.
Hi.
We'll say hello and hello. And tell us where to find you, what you generally do, and what religion you used to be.
Yeah. I'm, as NotJah said, I'm Jen from Jen's Little Corner. You can find me at Jen's Little Corner on YouTube or Jen's Little Corner on Twitter. I do LGBTQ content as well as science content and debunking content because I hate people who preach stupid shit, and I like to point out that it's stupid. I do a little bit of atheist content as well, although that seems to be the smaller part of what I do. I do a lot of live streams too, which include like raising voices of other people in the LGBTQ community and talking about bigger issues with groups of people who are a bit more specialized in certain topics than I am. So yeah, that's pretty much what I do. As far as religion goes, I was brought up in the Uniting Church in Australia, which is actually a little bit different to other Uniting churches like in Canada and the US. The Uniting Church in Australia was a combination of, still is, a combination of the Methodist Church, Presbyterian Church, and the Scots Church. It's a fairly progressive church in comparison to a lot of them, but, it still has those churchy overtones where there are certain things you're supposed to follow and believe and do and stuff. So, yeah, that's my history with it.
Very cool. Well,
so,
kind of cool.
Well, kind of cool, yeah. It is what it is.
Yeah, that's it. So those that don't know should know by now, but if you don't know, Atheist Flashbacks is where we take on a guest and run them through their old theist self with a bunch of questions, and they have to answer as, best they can as their old self. And if they break character, they have a drink. Feel free to, drink along with us, but whatever happens is your own fault. You can't blame us. Yeah, fair call. I kind of half already am, but shh.
So I gotta catch up, don't I, NotJah?
You do. I know, I'm a few ahead. Well, first question before we actually get right into it is, what are you drinking?
I am drinking melon liqueurs, which is, and nobody can see that because my light is so bright. It's basically a Midori, but one of the cheaper brands. I actually quite like this one, and I'm hoping I can get some more of it because it really is kind of cheap. It's like $12 a bottle, which is... most of the cheap stuff is garbage, but I was just buying stuff that I could get when we first went under quarantine because I was afraid I wasn't going to be able to get any alcohol. And I need my alcohol under quarantine.
But
I really like this one, so. Yeah, you know me. I'm an Australian in that I can't stand beer, and I did try one of the ones that you recommended to me, and it ended up being poured down the sink. So you guys are. Yeah, no, I couldn't get Wakachangi. It was one of the other ones Mero had suggested, and I can't remember what it was called, but it ended up down the sink. I haven't been able to find Wakachangi.
It'd be hilarious if it was a Furfies.
Actually, it might have been.
Yeah, that's the one Pastor likes, and I couldn't stand it. It's terrible. But anyway, that's another story. So, we're ready to get into it. This is where
we're ready to get into it.
Your old Christian self.
Yeah, my old Christian self. Wow.
Alrighty. So, first question that I should ask that I think is appropriate is: does your faith and does your religion allow you to drink alcohol?
Yes, it does. Although, having said that, my mum would only drink alcohol like a certain family do's, and she has a thing for drinking snowballs. And my dad, although he hardly ever drank anything, he used to make his own homemade wine. And believe me when I say that thing could knock your socks off.
Very cool.
So yes, we were allowed to drink. The whole idea was to be in moderation with things. So it wasn't encouraged to go out of your way to get drunk or take drugs or anything like that. That was frowned upon. You were supposed to be in moderation, but you could have a bit of fun. So,
Oh, fair enough. They're not too strict on that then.
no.
So you could go to like parties and stuff like that. That wouldn't be a problem as long as you're not.
No,
You're
I
going
could go to
crazy
the
or whatever.
parties as long as I'm home at a decent sort of time and didn't come home completely wasted. It's fine. Although I have done that, usually much to my mother's disgust.
Very cool.
Have never got grounded for it, but I had a few choice words said to me. Not that my mum ever sweared, but my mum could convey. Well, she don't know. My mum does swear. She doesn't swear a lot, and she's selective about what swear words she uses, but she has a cutting tongue when she needs to.
Very cool.
And she knows how to make you feel bad.
Parents are pretty good at that.
They are. Dad, on the other hand, rarely a bad word comes out of his mouth. But you're told off by Dad. You knew you were told off because then it was really something serious.
Yeah, I was thinking that it'd be one of those ones where, like, the one that's the friendly one over the less serious stuff. Like, if they actually get angry, it's like, oh.
Yeah, I really fucked up at this point, sort of thing. So, yeah.
What led you in? Were you born into it, so to speak, or?
Yeah, my mum started off as Church of England, which is the Anglican Church. I think most people in Australia, unless of course you're part of the Anglican Church, just call it the Anglican Church. They don't say Church of England, but it is the same church. When she married my dad, much to her own mother's disgust, she converted over and joined the Uniting Church. So myself and my siblings, we all grew up in the church. We went to Sunday school and then later all taught Sunday school as well. So, so I like to think that I helped another generation learn about God.
Fair enough. So as you mentioned Sunday school and how is that a once a week kind of thing for church, or is there more things through the week?
Yeah, for us with it depended on the Uniting Church you went to. Ours was a smaller one in the town I used to live in. So for us, the church would have their service as normal beforehand, and then they'd have a special service for the kids, so the parents could leave the kids there, and they'd have a small service for the kids, and then the kids would do Sunday school. So the kids' service was separate from the adult service, and then it was about an hour a week on a Sunday, and basically you went through and you went through different Bible studies and learnt all the different core stories of the Bible. Pretty much as they are. Although unlike some churches, we also do actually believe in science. So we don't think like the Earth is 6,000 years old. We do think it's billions of years, and we see Genesis as allegory more than factual.
Okay.
So that concept that like Catholics have of the fall isn't believed in the Uniting Church. It's more a case of each of us falls by our own deeds. So there's no such thing as original sin for us.
It's just a representation of each person's
it's a representation. Yeah. So the story is about how people fall more than an actual honest goodness Garden of Eden. And it's about how you can fall as a person by moving away from Christ and not keeping within the faith. And whilst we do believe that you're saved through faith, we also believe that if you don't show that faith, then your commitment to the faith is false, and you will be judged on demonstrating a false faith. So your actions speak as much as you saying that you believe.
So I'm curious to know, like, 'cause I'm stuck like a little bit back when you were mentioning Genesis and the Genesis story, like,
Yeah.
it's more allegory, did you say?
Yeah, more
rather
allegory
than
than
something literal. Does that go with the entire book of Genesis, or is it just the typical Genesis story that is?
The creation story. As far as the creation story goes, that's just allegory. Most of us tend to. There's no denial of, like the Big Bang or evolution within the Uniting Church. I mean, some people may not think that evolution happened, but all the Uniting Church people I met do. We see it as God's tool for creation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fair enough.
So God set things in motion, and with an aim that evolution was guided to get to us. So
well, what about the
billions
rest
of years
of what
isn't a
is in
problem for us.
Genesis?
Dinosaurs not being with humans aren't a problem for us. It's fine. Sorry,
But
what about what?
The rest that is in Genesis. So not just the creation story itself.
You're trying to get at Noah's Ark. Is that what you're moving to?
Sure.
Yeah.
I wonder how you
Okay.
managed to guess that, because there are so many quality stories in Genesis.
There are quality stories in Genesis. Yes.
And you happened to guess that I was going for Noah's Ark.
Because everyone heads for Noah's Ark. Look, we know from the science that there was some giant floods about 10,000 years ago that flooded a lot of the area of that area, and that was the area that was the world to the early Israelites. So as far as having a flood that covered the world, we had a flood that covered their world. And we understand that whilst the Bible is the word of God, the Bible is written by people, and we have to try and understand it through their language of the time. So when we say there was a worldwide flood, they're talking about a flood that covered their area. And yes, Noah's Ark happened, but he didn't have to go and save all the kangaroos, and he didn't have to go and save all the others, because this was all about God's chosen people. It wasn't about the rest of the world. Effectively, at that time, God's care for the world centered around the early Israelites.
Yeah, around his people.
Around his people. And then it spread out from Jesus afterwards. So you get... so you don't need this... I mean... we don't understand creationists who think that dinosaurs were on the ark. That's crazy. That's crazy talk. And they don't need to be. And kangaroos didn't need to be. You're only talking about the animals that were in the area. And that wasn't hard for Noah to do. And even over the time frame, it was actually pretty simple. And and we also understand that this, we know that there are two slightly contradicting stories in this that have been woven together. And that's because there have been two accounts written of it, and people's accounts written from verbal stories that were handed down can change over time. So we know that this won't be exactly what happened, but again, it's allegory to the actual story of Noah that did happen. Exactly. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, it actually does. I was like taking a big deep breath in, let's say, just as you finish that. Yeah, no, I get where you come from, definitely. So that's fair enough. All right, we'll move on a little bit if you want to. We'll go on to
move on.
The typical story of the Exodus of Egypt. Is that something that's taught as a literal story, or is that also a bit of an allegory or metaphorical tale?
When we get down to there, we tend to see it as something that happened, that the Israelites were in Egypt, and they got out of there, and that Moses was a real person. That's kind of important to how we perceive the Bible per se. But there's also elements of the story that don't necessarily have to be true in the extended way that they are written. For example, parting the Red Sea can be an allegory for getting on a barge and going across the ocean.
But they had
we're
terms for that.
we're accepting that it
Like,
doesn't
why
have
wouldn't
to
they-
be. Sorry?
Why would they use such colourful language to describe just getting on
Because
a
the Bible's
barge
got a lot of
across?
colorful language, because these are stories that were initially passed down verbally before written out.
Okay.
And to make the stories work well, when you tell them, they get things added to them. So we know this happens. So we're accepting of the fact that the only way we can get to the truth of it is to look around the story and see where it comes out from. Now, it's quite possible that God did split the Red Sea, and we're quite happy with that. But we're also quite happy if somebody within the church is like, doesn't want to take that because it seems to go against how science can work. And that's fine too. The accepted thing, though, is that Moses led the people out of Egypt, and they wandered in the desert, and we do accept that.
What about how long he wandered in the desert? Is that an absolute 40 years?
No, or with approximately. I mean, yeah, give or take half a decade, maybe. But I mean, the thing is, if you're following these symbols in the sky and you actually don't know where you're going, it doesn't matter if it's a little way up the coast to get there. People get lost very easily. And as God's the one guiding, and if God is teaching our ancestors, well, the Israelites, a lesson in humility here, then making the wander in the desert is part of what his plan was. So
it was several, like, I don't know exactly, hundreds of thousands of Israelites, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
In an area, like, it's not a very large area to be wandering for 40 years, and nobody finds them. Nobody stumbles across them on a trading route. They don't come across any.
Well, just because it's not mentioned that nobody found them doesn't mean that they didn't come across other people.
They just.
I mean, you've got traveling nomads anyway that are in those desert areas. So having another.
So they just chose to be lost.
Well, they were kept lost. They maintained their faith and followed God, and God kept them in this position because he was teaching them humility.
Fair enough. I'll take that. Okay, well, what led to all of this? Why did Moses have to lead them all out of Egypt?
Well, I mean, there's a level of suffering that God was prepared to put his people through so that they could learn this humility. And I know you would put another approximately 40 years on them in the desert, but keeping them in virtual slave conditions in Egypt was not something that could continue on and still have his people be his people. He had to raise them up eventually so that they could shine a beacon to the rest of the area.
I'm not actually sure I followed that.
Well, I mean, the Israelites ended up in Egypt, and this was part of a punishment thing from God, and most of them ended up in the slavery positions.
Yeah.
So when God chose to raise them out of Egypt through Moses, he was delivering them from that slavery, from those conditions. Now, when they got in the desert, they didn't necessarily still follow him, despite the miracles and things that he'd done through Moses to help them get there. So he had to teach them a bit of humility once they got there. But he was still delivering his people from this situation. So, and he needed his people out of that situation and become their own nation, so that they could start shining a beacon, so that people can understand, because he was preparing for when he would send his son.
Yes, that is the way I understand it too. It all leads up to that.
It all leads up, yeah.
So I'm assuming then that the pestilences that the Egyptians suffered would have been all true and legit.
Well, yeah. I mean, God had to encourage the Pharaoh to let his people go.
By killing
And
the innocent child of every person that didn't do the blood offering thing.
Yeah, well, the Bible also says that God is a jealous and unforgiving God.
Apparently he's
And
merciful
can be,
too, but he didn't show
and
those
he is
children any
also
mercy.
merciful. But you've got to understand that a lot of God's mercy at that time was allocated only to his chosen people, because these other
Definitely
people were
true.
heathens and not
Yes.
following him. So,
And it was obvious to follow him, obviously.
well, I mean, there'd already been prophets and other people at the time who'd stood up and shown God's way. So, yeah, the people were wanting to be apart from God so that they could live in the lifestyles they were accustomed to instead of the way God wanted them.
Fair enough. I did actually have another question, and it has eluded me already. It was something to do with something you'd said earlier, and I was trying to hold on to it in the back of my mind, but yeah, it didn't last.
Well, you might think of it again later. I might say something that triggers it.
It was
You're triggered.
It was something to do with the Exodus story there, though. Like, it was something about that.
Was it about
that's
the
right.
calf?
What about? No, it was about the slavery. What do you think about the evidence of the Israelites weren't actually slaves? There was no slaves in Egypt.
Well, I mean, if they weren't slaves, why did Moses have to cry out for them to be freed? People who aren't slaves don't have to be freed. They're not being held onto by a tyrant. So, yes, quite obviously they were slaves.
So I suppose this is one instance where the belief and scientific reasoning don't quite align. Like, if you had somebody that was in your church that was like, but that doesn't make sense because of science, would that be something they'd be like, well, no?
I think it would. I mean, these things are always up for discussion. It's not like the church is dead fast in absolutely everything. There are academic discussions about how these work, especially as new evidence has come up about different things, because we're all trying to better understand the text and God's message. And there's a lot of people with inspiration from God to help them understand this and to build a better picture for us of what things were like at the time. But I mean, ultimately, even if there are some errors within the accounts in the Old Testament, it doesn't overly change the progression progression story to where we end up with Jesus and salvation for our sins.
Fair dues. It all comes back to that, of course. And we'll get there as well. We're not too far off of it. I'm curious. Okay, we'll move on a little bit. I'm curious to know what about the story of God, now I've lost it. Jonah and the big fish or whatever.
Jonah and the big fish.
Yeah, how he gets swallowed for like 3 days. Now, how do we square that?
Okay, well, there are animals like there are small frogs who can actually swallow their young and carry them around in the stomach without eating. So there is precedence in nature of animals being able to do this. So it's not
in Wales.
unthinkable. Sorry?
But in Wales, this is a little different to a frog.
Yeah, I realize it's a little bit different.
Just thinking of biology and all, like, they're not quite the same.
There's no reason why God can't tweak the biology in just one animal so that an animal is capable of doing this.
Okay, so it's one of those that just it's with God's
Yeah, I mean, we
direct
get
power.
mutations all the
Otherwise
time.
it would be...
What if we had an odd bod whale that just had this mutation, and it was and God set that in play
Okay.
right for this to happen? So it's not inconceivable. We can see it in nature that it's possible, and it's not inconceivable that a mutation similar couldn't be there for a whale to be able to do this. So yeah, it's not inconceivable. And if it's not inconceivable, I don't see any point. I don't see any reason why we should deny that this couldn't happen.
This is true. That's fair. That's a fair point. I mean, on the same level, it is not inconceivable that unicorns exist. So there's no point denying them.
Wow. I mean, yes, you could say I wouldn't deny
Dragons.
that they could exist.
They are on TV. Both of these are on TV. Like, I've seen them, so they must exist.
Well, I wouldn't deny that they couldn't have existed. As to existing now, that's probably unlikely because we don't have them here to see them. But yeah, there might have been one. We just haven't found the fossil evidence for one. That's all.
Fair enough. All right, I won't push that any further. So, God mutated a whale or a fish, shark, maybe, to swallow poor Jonah for 3 days. How did Jonas just survive in there though? Like, because he's not a frog, he's not going to be able to
hibernate.
Like, yeah, like what does he do? How is he eating? What is he drinking?
Oh, you can survive for a few days without food and water. Granted, he would have been
he'd be right on
not
the
well
cusp
by the time
of
he got out the other end.
After 3 days without water.
You can go a few days without water.
That's
I mean, it's not like he was in the burning sun. It's not like he was in the burning sun.
No, exactly. He's just getting digested. It's so
well, no,
better.
because I've already explained that the whale,
the genetic whale or whatever. Yeah. Okay, we'll go with that.
So yeah, it's
oh, shit.
Yeah, and I'll grant that by the time he gets to the other end of where he was going,
did he pop out the other end?
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure it says the whale spat him out on the land, so he would have come
That's
out.
what I thought, yeah.
I was saying at the other end of his destination, I meant not out the rear end of the whale, although that would be funny.
It would be quite. I mean, it was already a relatively interesting story for me as a kid, but that would have made it 10 times.
That would have made it, yeah. I mean, all
and
kids
then
like
the whale shot him out on the beach.
I mean, there's also the aspect that we do say it was 3 days, but I mean, is that an exaggeration that creeped into the story? That's possible too. I'm not sure what the distances were from where he would have been in the boat to from where then he had to be taken to where he was going. So, I mean that the sea areas in Mesopotamia all around that area aren't all that big. For a whale, anyway. I mean, a whale can traverse quite a large distance in a day, so it's conceivable that it may not have taken 3 days, but that's just the way the story ended up. Especially as Jonah himself would have been a little bit disorientated by the time he got out of this whale.
Yeah, it'd be hard for him to tell how many days.
How long he'd been in there. I mean,
yeah.
we know, we've done tests with people in isolation, and people lose complete
they'll lose track real quick.
Yeah. So Jonah might have thought he was there for 3 days. Maybe he was there for like half a day or 20 hours or something like that, which totally solves the whole problem of how did he survive. That's not an issue at that point, and the 3 days is just an exaggeration.
Absolutely.
Yeah. See, logic and science get you there.
I had to leave that go silent.
Yeah, now I'm gonna have to drink because there's no way I can stay in character off the bat.
I knew I'd be able to get it somewhere. I'm like, you're gonna be a tough cookie, but
Oh, damn you,
I got a
NotJah,
few.
damn you. Why?
I got a few things up my sleeve. I can get you.
Oh, no, I know where you're heading eventually.
Yeah, I know. That's the thing. I know you know where we're going. Like, I'm gonna have to start mixing it up. Like, I'm trying to add different things and change it around a bit.
Yeah, you probably got here. And I'm going to stay out of character, and I will have another drink because of this.
Okay.
My dad was a school teacher, and he loved science, and he rationalized most of these stories himself, and he taught us to be rational thinkers, and he taught us his rationalizations. So some of this I'm coming off the top of my head because it's been a long time and I'm trying to remember. But a lot of this is stuff that Dad would say to me if I asked a question like, how could this have been? And he'd explain it to me. And if you're a kid, even as a teenager, this is very, very, very reasonable. It really is. In comparison to some of the things that you will hear from Christians, this is reasonable. But what isn't reasonable is some of the other baggage that comes along with being a Christian.
Oh, and it comes with a lot. But you're right.
Yeah, I know you'll get that.
Definitely, yeah, it definitely is. Reasonable compared so far, anyway, or at least is what I'm hearing. Okay, jump back in.
Yep.
Because we've got lots more to cover. Alrighty.
Go for it.
So I think we've done pretty good on Jonah. What about we'll move on to another J name, Job. You know the story of Job. Yeah.
Well, we see Job as allegory, not an actual real story. So of a person.
Okay.
Job is
there wasn't somebody that lost their family or anything like that.
Yeah,
just a story.
Not that this was all cruel, but as an example of how holding your faith can eventually give you riches. So, not that this actually happened, that this is an allegory. So,
yeah, okay, fair enough. So, I going down the line of reasoning that those people died and blah blah blah. That's like, well, maybe they didn't. Probably wasn't real people.
No, it wasn't real people. It was allegory. Yeah, okay. So they weren't real people who died. It was a story. It was a story to highlight a point. I mean, if you go to the New Testament, Jesus tells stories all the time to highlight points, and they're not about real people. They're obvious parables. Job is a parable.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. That's fair enough. And we're pretty much right on the Jesus thing. The first question I want to ask, actually, in regards to Jesus is, would you say that he is a direct descendant of David?
Whether he is or he isn't a direct descendant of David, I think is irrelevant because God anoints him as his own dear son. So needing to be a direct descendant, I mean, a lot of Jews a lot of Israelites were considered direct descendants, even if they weren't. I mean, you've got your so many degrees of separations, and that you've got smaller countries. So you go back far enough in the generation lines, and people are going to be related anyway. So the chances of somebody being of David's line was actually pretty good. I mean, especially as David was a king who.
So, but it's not terribly important of a detail.
Yeah, I don't see it as important. I mean, even to the point, and I actually brought this up in a church meeting where I actually said that I thought that the idea of a virgin birth was actually irrelevant to the rest of the story.
So it doesn't even have to be a virgin birth.
No, well, me personally, that was my take on it, and
okay,
because
so that's nice,
but coming back to the same thing, that even if Joseph is the father, the fact that God anoints him at his baptism, anoints Jesus at his baptism with John the Baptist, that this is my own dear son with whom I am well pleased. God has anointed him as his son. The biology of it doesn't matter at that point. You can be anointed by the creator of all things to be their son or their daughter or whatever else. And you are. At that point,
'Cause-
you are, and the rest of it's irrelevant. So I don't see that it matters whether it was a virgin birth or not.
Excuse me.
I mean,
Does
not
this
all the
only
Gospels
work with
state that it was a
Jesus, though?
virgin birth. So there's conflict within the story itself, and as I've
Fair
said,
enough,
some of the things are obviously have changed over time, and we accept that, and you have to dig in deeper to find the truth underneath. So this is why now I'll wholeheartedly stay straight off. When I said this, I was challenged by a few people in the church because they didn't like my take. They much preferred the idea that Jesus was a virgin birth, from a virgin birth, and I'm fine with that too. I just don't see that it's necessary.
Yeah, you brought up that if you're anointed by God, it doesn't matter the rest. Basically, that's that you're anointed by God. Is that only with Jesus, or is that something that could happen anytime?
I guess it could have happened at any time. If God chose to anoint somebody else, if
that's something
another
that
person
somebody
was
claims
needed,
happens these days, today. You hear in the news, dude
that they're anointed by God,
claims he's anointed by God. So
I think he would have to
Jesus.
demonstrate the miracles that Jesus demonstrated during his life.
Well, they aren't exactly terribly difficult to reproduce.
I grant that, but at Jesus' time, they didn't have the advantage of a lot of the technology and equipment that magicians have now.
They don't need a lot of that. You can do a lot of those tricks live in the streets.
Maybe some of them. I'd like to see the walk on water when it comes off a boat that's already floating on the water.
In a storm. Yeah. If I remember correctly, anyway, because that was the reason he walked.
And then calming the storm itself. I mean, I know you've got coincidence and they might have read the weather and it could have calmed. And that's fine. Fine if you want to believe that. But he still walked out from a boat that was out in the middle of the water. It wasn't like he walked out from the beach where they could have preset this up with a bit of glass. And God knows where they got the glass from then. But he did it from the boat. And there were witnesses. So, there were miracles that happened. I'm fine with the idea that...
Was he on the boat with them, was he?
I can't remember. Yeah, I think
don't actually recall.
He walked out to the boat, and then he got
walked out from
Peter to walk out to him.
Walked out from
the shore, but the boat was a fair way out. It wasn't just sitting.
Yeah, so but that could never have been set up.
Well, I guess it could have, but you're asking a lot of them to do that, especially when there was a storm. I mean, could have ruined whatever they tried to set up.
When you're trying to convince people that you're a god, that's not that much to set up.
Except that Jesus never called himself a god.
Hypothetically speaking, I should say, a god. Somebody with extraordinary powers of such supernatural.
No, I get your point there. But he brought he healed people. He brought people back from the dead. And now I know that our concept of dead is very different to what their concept of dead is. And just with a little bit of medical knowledge back then, he could have done a lot of things that
a lot of
other people would have been
healers today that are even on television, making a lot of money.
I'm aware of this. But I think there's a consistency there within the things that he did. So
there's a consistency with the ones on television too.
But to just discard that, and especially in the time when it was done, I mean, that's my point. I mean, yes, today you could videotape somebody and really see what they were up to, which you couldn't back then. I will grant you that. But you've got to allow for the fact that at the time it was done, the setups required for some of those things would have been enormous. And I think, and aside from that, what did he really have to gain from it? It's not like he made a living out of what he did. He ended up dying for it.
He did, but he also
was the benefit? What was his personal benefit? I mean, street magicians and that do what they do for a personal benefit. I don't see Jesus as gaining a personal benefit from it.
Fair enough. That's ample enough answer. If you'll allow me, I'm going to ask the next question and then run and grab myself a drink because I'm out, and that's inappropriate for this game. I need to have a drink. So, still on Jesus, I want to know, what about the resurrection? Is that a literal thing or not a literal thing? And just give us a bit of detail if, is it, for example, when he came back, was that a physical return? Was it a spiritual return? Like after he died sort of thing and he came back to life?
We're kind of in the middle there. We're kind of in the middle there. We kind of see Jesus as coming back as both spiritual and physical. So a spiritual being who could manifest in the physical. So yeah, in that sense, he was at that point his spiritual being self and not just a mortal human. He was definitely the God man at that point, and could so he could manifest himself in the physical form for them, but he was also his spiritual self, which is why he could appear to Saul as he did on the road to Damascus. So
gotcha. Okay. What was next? But so that's how that's so that not necessarily that a physical body came back to life of the original.
Yeah, well, he didn't need to at that point. He at the point of the resurrection, he only needs to be his spiritual self to show that he let his physical form die to help to save us from our own sins and to give us a path back to God. So at that point, he doesn't need to come back as a physical being. He can be a spiritual being who can take physical form, obviously. I mean, we see a similar thing with angels coming down as light beings, but then can manifest physically. So there is no reason why Jesus cannot do the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Okay. Okay, so what about, we'll move on a little bit into Revelations. What is your general read of what happens in Revelations?
Yeah, I've got mixed interpretations on Revelations. I have a brother-in-law who's actually a Catholic, and a lot of my concepts from Revelation actually come from him, more so than Mum and Dad, because they didn't talk about Revelations as much, and it wasn't really as big a discussed thing. I think because a lot of people think that Revelations was written for the Israelites at the time more so than for us, and the prophetic things within them were for the Israelites at the time more so than being an actual full-on prediction of what was happening in the future. So whilst it can give us pictures of what will be happening in the future, it's not a dead cert ringer for what is going to happen. It's very much allegory. It's very much open for interpretation and kind of like poetry of the future for what can happen, what will happen in the future. That God has a plan for it, and that there is a passage here, but a lot of it was written for the Jews at the time, and it was to give them hope. And I'm not saying there's not stuff for hope for us now. There obviously is, but the picture of that is very, very different for us than it was for them. I tend to follow what my dad believed in this, and that is more that there isn't so much going to be an end of times for us as an entire planet. Although, I mean, obviously there will be, because the sun's going to blow up one day and then we're all gone. So yes, there will be in that sense, but
that's if we're lucky enough as a species, even if it evolved from now, but a species to still be
I mean, God might decide that it's over now and the big asteroid comes and hits us. So I mean, we don't know. We don't know the passage of how that's going to happen. So
speaking of an asteroid, can I ask a random quick question?
Yeah.
You know how God did the flood, and then he's like,
Yeah.
Noah, I'm never going to do that again. Here's a rainbow. Do you reckon he did that to the dinosaur, or not the dinosaurs, but whoever was survived after he killed off the dinosaurs with the comet? He's like, mammals and lizards and the other things that are still like, here is a, the stars, for example, like, or a particular star. So, I'll never do that again.
I mean, you got to remember that as far as guiding evolution, we were the goal of that guiding, and of course we weren't there then. So
we're
God
not
didn't
evolving
need to provide
from
so God didn't need to provide a promise to the dinosaurs or whatever other animals were alive at the time of that asteroid. Those lives were important because they helped set up things that would be available in our planet for us now, like oil and coal and stuff like that have helped us to get to a point where we can get technology to the point that we can communicate God's message across the whole world. That was all kind of important to get there.
I'm not too sure of the accuracy of the statement you just made, but okay.
What? That we needed... Well, we did. We needed those billions of years to lay
for
organic
the dinosaurs
compounds
to be oils.
Well, the dinosaurs themselves aren't what were the oils, but the dinosaurs were just
yeah.
the life that helped evolve at the time. That part of the life that was evolved at the time that helped change the way that the Earth was. So God used the flora and fauna that was there to change how things were.
Though, that's all. I know.
Sorry.
Concerned.
Yeah, no. Most of the oil we get comes from the various planktons that were in the ocean, but it's still organic matter or forests.
I'm with you.
But these billions of years in time with other animals, other plant life, and all that was needed on the world to get to this point where we have
what we have. But
the things that we have now that let us develop to the point where we are. Sorry?
So when we as a species are no longer evolving, like we won't continue to evolve, are we now what God wanted?
Well, we may do. I mean, there may be an aspect of getting us evolving more to maybe become even more in His image. God made us in His image, but that took a long time, and we may not even be there yet. Maybe the ultimate aim is that we may actually become more like the angels themselves over time as a species, and there isn't this whole thing if you've got to die before your soul can move on to become
why would it
one with the heavenly host. So I don't know. I can't say what God's plan is because we don't know God's plan.
That's true. No, exactly.
So
He works in mysterious ways.
Yeah, he works in mysterious ways, and I can guess, but I mean, it's still only a guess, isn't it? I don't know the future.
He does have a plan, though.
Yeah, he does have a plan.
Okay, very cool. So quickly back onto Revelations before we move on again. From what I'm getting from you, at least, the things like the rapture, they wouldn't be a literal thing that we have to look forward to.
Yeah, with the way that I believe, from what I learned from my dad, and that is, no, I don't believe in the rapture. I believe that each of us lives out our lives and then are judged on our belief and our actions.
Okay.
So, cool. So just saying you believe in God is not enough, because God can see through that. And if you're not a good enough person with your actions, then you didn't hold up your promise to when you took Jesus into your heart. You basically hardened your heart so Jesus couldn't be there. So you have to be a good enough person as well.
That makes sense. All right. What would be your favorite either Bible story or book of the Bible going through them?
As far as passages goes, Psalm 121 is probably my favorite, which is, I lift mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. Because that helped me through a lot of difficult times in my teens. It's like God was always going to be there and going to help me and not going to forsake me. Having said that, I did often feel that He tested me more than I could maybe handle it at times. but I'm still alive and I'm still here, so obviously it wasn't as bad as what I thought.
Hey, what's the he doesn't give you a challenge you can't handle or something?
Yeah.
What?
And those challenges make you a stronger and better person ultimately, and there's reasons for.
And I mean,
yeah,
even
like I said, there's a plan.
whether you're religious or not, that's generally pretty true. You know.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. What about, we'll flip it, and what are your least favorite Bible story or book of the Bible? Like one that you dread?
Okay. I really don't like Sodom and Gomorrah. I know it's a story about being a better person and obeying
nasty.
God.
I mean, sorry.
Yes, that whole thing of offering your daughters up to be raped, actually, I found really hard to deal with.
So your son to be killed by,
yeah.
what was it, Abraham and Isaac? That's okay.
Yeah, well, yeah. No, not particularly. But I mean, God does stop Abraham from killing his own kids, so
Fair point.
yes. So
I shall grant
it
you
was
that.
it was a test to see if he would do it, and
so God would have definitely stopped him, you know.
Yeah.
Okay. What was before I brought up least favorite? Sodom and Gomorrah.
It's my least favorite. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's fair enough. Okay.
I find that one hard to reconcile, especially as a woman and somebody who's survived rape. But I just find that really hard to deal with as a story.
Makes sense. I mean,
and breaking character. It's something
I was wondering. I'm not sure. Like, is that?
I'm not sure if I'm in character anymore with this one because that story still disturbs the hell out of me.
I'm like, now you've broken character. So.
It's. I just really can't deal with that. It's like, how can you read that and think that any of that is good?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it probably was one of the stories I found the most hard to deal with. But I did to go in with your thing of how things were. I found not so much with later ministers who were part of the church, but earlier ministers. If we brought up questions about things and they were complicated like that, and they gave us little bullshit answers. Well, I perceive now as little bullshit answers, and they never talked about it ever again. So it's like, we're going to forget that exists because it's going to disturb people in the congregation. So we'll talk about the things that we can reconcile and deal with. Now, my mum and dad weren't like that, and they found that they believed that there were passages in the Bible that were almost impossible to reconcile without going to allegory or going with that they've been changed so much in the retelling that we're not actually getting the original story. Yeah. And that tends to be how the Uniting Church looks at it now, that you have to go into a lot more interpretation to get to the root of what the stories were now. And perhaps a lot more of the Old Testament is allegory than they used to believe. So I get that. So to maintain faith and accept that certain things in the Old Testament aren't good, you turn it into allegory.
I mean, you pick and choose what you want to believe is real and what you want to believe is a story. So
yeah.
All right.
So, now I'll have a drink.
Have a drink. Yeah. We'll get back into it. Just generally speaking, what's your favorite part of going to church?
Oh, the fellowship. Talking with the other members of the congregation, spending time with them and singing. I love the music. I do music. I'm a brass instrument player. I can also play keyboards. I've been in several bands as part of the church, both doing singing and playing music, and I absolutely love that. I've done youth ministry as well, where I've run youth groups and stuff like that, and there's always been music involved. I just love music. Music is a good hook for me.
That's awesome. I can relate to that. Not with my former religion, of course, but just in general. The music is awesome.
Yeah, music is it. Music is
What
where it's at.
What about your least favourite part, going to church?
To be honest, probably the occasional lay preacher who just could not tell a sermon to save their life.
Yeah, very cool.
You get these people who just, they start talking, you go, have you even read the passage that you're talking about?
Oh, so it's
But
not that they're like boring or whatever, like.
Oh no,
they
some
just
of
don't
them
know
are
what they're
boring
talking
as all
about.
hell. There are some people who just cannot tell a sermon, and within your own church, it doesn't have to be a minister who tells a sermon. It can be a lay preacher as well.
Yeah.
So my dad was a lay preacher, and he'd occasionally do sermons. Now he was good, and he'd go into the science behind things, and he would also go into the stories. He'd even go into history of where some of the early texts of the Jews were where it's obvious that they were borrowed from other cultures. So you've got things like I'm struggling to remember. You've got things like where I think it was Marduk, who was one of the gods in Babylonia, and also Baal, who were then reinterpreted as being demons within Christianity because they were a neighboring religion's gods, so they had to be demons to fit in within within Jews and Christians. So it was interesting, but yeah, it's fascinating. But like I said, my mum and dad weren't staunch believers in exactly the same way as some other people are, because the church is more open in its way of thinking. There's this concept that any concept of faith and belief in gods can lead you to God. So if you are born to another religion and you are faithful to that religion and you are a good person with it, you may still not go to hell because you were a good enough person and you had faith. So it didn't necessarily need to just be faith in Jesus if you never got the opportunity to hear about Jesus.
Fair enough. But what if you had and you just didn't think, you was like,
if you rejected Jesus out of hand and everything, there was still the option that when you die, you would have the option to accept that Jesus was who was said to be.
Okay.
But your life had to be lived good enough to follow that. So if you chose a religion you were brought up in over becoming Christian, even though you've heard about Christianity, you could still be saved, provided you lived a good enough life and you were prepared on death on your death.
What is it?
Or after your death,
what
to
does
accept.
it take to live a good life in God's eyes?
The golden rules are way more important. To especially love thy neighbor as thyself, and love the Lord your God. But in loving the Lord your God, you have to know about the Lord your God, or at least accept the Lord your God. So if you can love the Lord your God with all your spiritual heart after death, that would be enough. And if you can show that you've showed that love to your neighbors during your life, you could live a good enough life. So you wouldn't want to be out murdering people or doing horrible things to other people, because especially if you could never show remorse for that, because then you'd be a bad person in the eyes of God, and then you deserve to be apart from God, and being apart from God is for eternity is basically hell.
So you'd have to show remorse before you die?
You'd have to show remorse.
Before
I think you'd have to have had remorse during your life for any bad things that you've done.
Okay.
So you tried to live a good life. Yeah, that doesn't mean you couldn't fail.
What about
we're accepting that people fail all the time, but you had to try to live that good life.
Okay. Well, what about you've got Jesus up on the cross, and the guy next to him was a murderer, I think, or something like that, and pretty much for nothing, Jesus said that he'd see the guy in heaven with him, so he was forgiven for nothing.
Well, that's a bit different when it's Jesus offering that forgiveness. I mean, like I said, we can't judge who Jesus will and won't forgive,
Okay.
even after death. So, whilst we believe that this is the case, that you have to have a good enough life, there is no reason that Jesus couldn't see into this person's heart and see that perhaps. I mean, because we have people who get condemned to death for ridiculous reasons. So, you have people in history who've had their arms cut off or even put to death for stealing a loaf of bread to feed their family.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
What kind of thief was this thief beside Jesus? Who was he? Was he somebody who was stealing to support his family?
I can never remember.
Was he a murderer?
I can't remember.
I can't remember.
It was one or the other.
I can't either. Sorry, I'm out of thing again.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember either.
So in that case, what does it actually take to be bad then? Like, what would be unforgivable?
What would be unforgivable? Honestly, for a God and for Jesus in that sense, I don't know that anything is unforgivable. But you have to want that forgiveness. You have to truly be repentant. You have to have at least tried, either in death or during your life, to make amends for the things that you have done. So I think if you just die and I think if you die and accept Jesus after death and you didn't lead a reasonably good life, you might be hard pushed to convince Jesus that you should get into heaven. Again, I'm not Jesus, I'm not God, I don't know this for sure, but we live our lives that this is the case, and we try to be the better people in the hope that when we die, despite the fact that we are sinful throughout lives, Jesus will go, well, hey, at least you made the effort and you believed, and you're believing me now, so come on in and I will make things right with you.
Yeah.
So
actually, that reminded me of the song Welcome to My World. What's the line? Won't you come on in? It's an Elvis song that was taken off of
I can't remember it either.
Biblical, but I quite like the song. Question number 42. What's the meaning of life?
Oh, well, the ultimate answer is 42, but yeah.
That you can't use that. It's question 42.
42. I know.
That's why I've done that, because it takes the joke away, because it's everyone's first thought.
It really does ruin it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, the ultimate
you have
meaning
to think
of life.
Proper answer.
I think it is to try and lead the best lives we can, and try and be good to the people around us, so that other people have a chance to lead a good life and lead by example in our own lives, like Jesus did.
No, that's fair enough. That's a solid answer, admittedly.
Yeah.
Not a bad answer. All right.
See, I'm pretty good at this.
All right.
Damn it! I got to drink again.
Yeah, actually, for that you do.
Come on, you haven't broken me yet. You've made me laugh, but you haven't broken me.
I know. Breaking is breaking character.
Oh, okay. I thought breaking was when you lose it because you got to something too deep.
No, that's breaking it all.
Oh, okay.
Everybody breaks.
Everybody breaks. Oh, everyone breaks character. Well, yeah, I definitely broke character.
Yeah. What was the question? Are there any things that you want to do but you're not allowed, or you sort of not meant to do?
Okay. The hardest thing for me as a Christian was dealing with being intersexed and ultimately being trans. Because I had learned all the passages in the Bible and the anti-homosexual stuff and things like that. And although the United Church now is very accepting of gays and trans people and everything, in the 80s when I was a kid, it was not. That was something that has changed for the church, and for the better as far as I'm concerned. So that was a real struggle for me, and it was a struggle for my parents when they were trying to deal with me as a teenager, and even a struggle for me in my 20s when I realized that I had to transition, and I didn't want to lose my faith as part of that. I ended up being able to deal with that. Well, there was two aspects to that. One was I ended up deciding that I'm either going to end up taking my life or I'm going to end up having to do this. And I thought taking my life was probably the worst thing to do in the eyes of the Lord than actually transitioning. So I got to that sort of point. And then I had a minister who was absolutely outstanding. And he actually went through those passages with me and explained to me how the translations from the Greek to the English have actually butchered a lot of what was said in some of those things. And that in the history of the Jews at the time, people being gay or people who possibly were trans at the time, although there's only a few. Whilst we know there are historical examples of trans people, they're not well written about because obviously gays and trans were mostly written out of history by the later church. Does that count as breaking character? I think it does.
Yeah, I think you kind of.
I think that last statement counts as breaking character.
Yeah, I wasn't going to be picky on it though.
Well, I did still transition and keep my faith, so I'm not being unrealistic to what happened. So
yeah.
But I had a minister who explained to me how this was and said, God still loves you, Jesus still loves you, and you can transition and be the person you are because God gave you this challenge. You were challenged in your genetics, you were challenged in your identity, and who's to say that you transitioning isn't what God wanted you to do so you could become a better spokesperson for how the direction that the church should be now. And I took up that challenge. I took up that challenge as me within the church, and I spoke about stuff like this within the church, and I helped cause some of the changes that happened within the Uniting Church. Only in a small way, but I was part of that, part of allowing there to be open gay ministers within the Uniting Church. Part of the Uniting Church being one of the first churches to openly embrace gay marriage, and to allow me as a trans woman to get married in the church even before gay marriage was allowed because I had a birth certificate that said I was female. So
that's pretty cool.
So that was an enormous challenge for me, though, to reconcile that with how I was brought up and how I was taught to think about these sort of things. Not that my parents were homophobic or anything like that, but that they were distant from it because they had this challenge to them with their faith. And I had a headmaster when I was, and Dad was the deputy head at the same school, so he knew him. I won't mention his name, although actually I think he's not. I think he actually died a few years ago, but I still won't mention his name. But he was gay. He was also single, and he was also Christian. And his way of reconciling who he was to admit that he was gay, but to never have a relationship because that would be wrong in the eyes of the Lord. And that was my challenge on being trans and being bisexual. Like, how do I reconcile my sexuality and my gender identity to being a Christian? And it took me a long time to be able to do that.
Okay.
And it wasn't the only thing. There were other aspects of things that happened when I grew up, but it was one of the big things that slowed down my getting to the point where I could transition and be myself. So yes,
so that's something that gave you a lot of doubt, like about having faith, and did it lead you away at all, or were you so determined to still believe?
It led me to change the way my faith was. I didn't want to lose my faith. I was very aware of it, and I really wanted it. So but it changed the way I perceived it. In as much as I'd been brought up to look for the deeper meaning in the Bible, and to look for allegory and look for the ways that things were written and how these stories were handed down, it enabled me to interpret how this was, so that I could reconcile who I am with my faith.
Very cool.
So yes, it was incredibly challenging, and it took me a long time to deal with it. And you're asking me to break character. Ultimately,
No, I'm not actually.
Well, I'm going to, because it's important to that progression.
Okay.
Ultimately, some of that and some of the aspects of how the church, not necessarily the Uniting Church, but other churches have treated LGBTQ plus people, and how the church in general treats minorities and other things, is what led me to lose my Christian faith. It's what put me down other avenues of spirituality. I was still very clingy to my spirituality, but I moved away from being Christian.
Fair call. We probably will get back to that.
I better have a drink for that, because I definitely broke character there.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, if you want to talk about how you can boss me, yeah, it was very hard for me to deal with that. It made it very hard to talk to my mum and dad about it when I had the issues. It made me hide what I was going through as a teenager, because, of course, being intersex, I was growing boobs at the same age as the other girls in school, and of course, from everyone else's perspective, because they were thinking I was a boy, that shouldn't have been happening. So I ended up hiding things that were happening to me and not talking about it with my parents, because I was afraid that what was happening to me would cop me a rejection, would be blamed on my lack of faith, which was ridiculous, because it wasn't kind of the way my parents were anyway. But I knew there were other people in the church who did think that way.
Yeah.
Or would be said that this is your trial, you're going to have to go through it one way, and I really didn't want to. I wanted to be me, and I knew who I was. I knew who I was from about the age of 10, 12, something like that. So it was a long time. It's from that 10 or 12 into my early 20s. It took me that long to reconcile this and get to a point where I could deal with who I was and start transitioning. So it really did hold back my life. And I think it holds back for a lot of people who are part of the LGBT community. Religion is a curse on people who are part of the community.
Oh yeah, that is true. I do want to ask a bit of a different question now, different train of thought.
Yeah.
What are their views on atheists?
Oh, what are my views on atheists? I'm not sure I was even aware that atheists existed when I was younger. Most of the friends I was around with I'm not even sure I was aware that other religions existed. Well, no, I was. I knew there were Buddhists, because I watched Monkey as a kid, and loved it. I loved ideas of magic and stuff like that. And I did even play Dungeons and Dragons. I wasn't banned from that because it was a fantasy. It was okay having magical fantasy ideas as long as you were aware they were fantasies and they weren't real.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was aware there was other religions. I was aware that there were the old classic religions, and I loved the old stories of the Greeks and the Romans and stuff like that. So, but I don't think I was aware that there were any people who didn't believe there was a God. I think that took me until I was probably in my late teens before I was even aware that that was a thing.
Fair enough.
And that was probably very much being sheltered from that idea, because we were oddly enough, the fact that I was brought up in a religion, a version of Christianity that was so much more open than a lot, it meant that I was actually obscured from the idea that there were people who didn't believe, because I was finding it hard to have reasons not to believe. You know, even at the worst stuff that I could throw at it, people would come back and say, well, you can fit that within your faith. So if you're constantly getting validation back from people in the long run, and the fears that you have over things that you think might get you pushed away don't come to fruition, it's very hard to imagine that there's anybody who's ever going to be pushed away. Yeah. So the concept of there actually being people who didn't believe was amazing to me. The fact that people could think that there was no such thing as a spiritual thing. And I also had experiences as a kid that I couldn't explain, like ghost-like figures, waking up and seeing my grandmother who died a few years earlier at the foot of my bed, things like that. But I'm gonna break character for this stupid story. Damn it! I can reconcile that now.
You're doing it by yourself.
Yeah, I know, it's dreadful, isn't it? I can reconcile that now with what I know about how the brain works now and stuff like that. But at the time, I couldn't. So they were spiritual things for me, and they convinced me that at least some form of spirituality was true. So my progression ended up not being to atheism from being Christian, it was to a form of spirituality, because I still believed in a spiritual thing. I just didn't necessarily think that Christianity was true. It was like, there's too many contradictions in there, but I'm okay for there to actually be a God or something equivalent to a God in the universe. I just don't think the Christian one's right. So my progression was from that to that, and then from that to like, hang on, I don't need a God at all. But that took more time. So it was a slower progression because I really wasn't aware that there was any such thing as an atheist.
And then I suppose that would go with apostates too, like the people who would go against the church.
Yeah, because I don't actually think we saw people that way. People would leave the church, but we didn't necessarily think they'd given up on faith. They just weren't interested in being at church, and we often would think they would come back.
Oh, okay.
So you weren't condemned for it. You were just encouraged to come back, share in the fellowship at the point. And we hoped that that you would come back. So it was very open and inviting and warm environment, very loving. I mean, even to the point that when I transitioned, I was welcomed in open arms in the church that I'd grown up in, and I was still a contributing member of the congregation.
Did you try and bring other people into the congregation?
I did, yes.
If you were trying to bring me into for church one day, what would you say to me, knowing I was an atheist, or just someone that wasn't generally going to church or something? What would you?
If I saw you as somebody who wasn't going to church, I would probably say, I'd probably wait until we had something special on, like if we had a special. We were young, like when I was younger, if it was I was dealing with somebody in their teens or in their early 20s, I'd say, hey, we've got this youth night on. This is going to be lots of really cool music. We're going to have lots of fun. Why don't you come along and join in the celebration? There's a dinner afterwards. It's going to be awesome. Come and have fun. And I invited quite a few people into the church that way. And a lot of them stayed because the music and the fun and the fellowship. And that was important, and people needed that.
And so they stayed long term?
Some of them did, not all of them. But some did.
Do you guys do baptisms and stuff like that?
Generally, as children, confirmation was more the thing for an adult.
Okay. Is that something many of them ever did?
I don't know if anybody I brought into church ever got confirmed. Only on the basis that I never did.
Very cool.
So even though I was an active member of the church, I delayed my confirmation because I wasn't confident about being confirmed because of being trans and everything, and I wasn't sure how I was going to fit all that in. And by the time it came to me being in the point where I could have been confirmed, I was already starting to move away to becoming spiritualist rather than being a Christian. So it never happened. I never confirmed in the church. But it wasn't because I wouldn't have. It's just never worked out.
I was on the way to getting baptized before I ended up leaving.
Yeah, I was baptized as a kid. There's lovely pictures of me in my baptismal dress.
Did a thing where it's at least at that time you didn't often get baptized early. They didn't push people that young to get baptized, but they do nowadays.
Yeah.
So I know we established before that God has a plan for us all. Like that's something. So I take it from that in that sense, we don't necessarily have free will. Like, even though we have free will, he knows what we're going to choose, yeah?
I God has a plan for us. It doesn't necessarily mean we stay on the plan. So there is an
Okay.
element of trying to choose the right path that God has laid before us, which is what caused my my kind of crisis of faith when I was looking to transition, because is
So is that
this
not
the
part of
path
his
that's
plan?
before me or not? Yeah, am I supposed to take this, or am I supposed to be like the headmaster I had and just grin and bear
Yeah.
it? Is that my challenge? And it took me a long time to reconcile that, and I needed the help of a minister to do that. So
I apologize if this is actually too personal, but is that transition part of God's plan?
yeah, I believe it is.
Okay. I'm just curious because I'd never even thought to ask that. Okay. So, but
I
would
wouldn't have been
God
able to
be
stay a Christian if I didn't think that.
fair enough? But sort of along the same lines, is God omniscient, where He knows all things? So even though, it's not necessarily you name it. I'm not talking about you now. It's just whoever they go against God's plan. Would God know that was going to be what went down? Like, is He able to know all things?
I actually don't know if I ever brought that question up with anybody in the church. I think I always kind of assumed that God had a plan. He had a layout for how things would go. He knew what challenges would be put in front of people, but He left it open for people to make a decision about how they would take on that path. So yes, whilst He probably had a reasonable idea of what people would do, I think He was quite happy to be surprised by people as well.
You did kind of break character at the start there.
Yeah, I thought I
had. But fair call.
Now I have to pour another one.
Oh no!
You got me through one.
Yay!
Although I have been drinking it even when I didn't break character. So,
so would you say that the things that go wrong in the world, are they part of God's plan, or are they all things that are going against God's plan?
I think some of the things that go wrong in the world is God testing people. Obviously, God tests people because there's evidence of that in the Bible itself. I think some of it is just, people do go against God's plan, and it can cause things to go awry from how the plan is. So that doesn't necessarily mean God doesn't have a way to get back to it. God can intervene in the way the world is going and shift things back to a variance of where He's planning on things. So ultimately, there is a long goal, but the pathway to get there is flexible to a certain extent.
Fair enough. So you wouldn't lay any blame there on God in any way, like whenever something's going wrong in the world, it's not His fault.
No, I don't think God deliberately sets out to make us stumble. He might put a rocky ground in front of us, but He doesn't necessarily set us out to stumble. There's always a way around it.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll kind of mix it up a little bit. Do you have any particular political opinions or affiliations that are influenced by your religion? So, like, for example, some religions, their pastor will specifically, sort of instruct the congregation, if lack of a better phrase, to vote in a particular way or for a particular policy or something like that. Is that something that?
No, our church basically kept religion away from politics. So apart from politics that directly affected the church. So if there was something that the church needed to stand up and put its voice to, like the question of gay marriage, then it would state its position on it. But if somebody within the church had a varying opinion to that and didn't like that, then they weren't forced to follow the church line because
Okay.
there isn't
So-
there isn't a hard and fast way. Like I said, there are variants in interpretations of how things go even within the church. It's a product of the church being a joining together of three different churches. So there were three different base ideas that came together, and that made more of a variance in how the church has developed. So the church has more openness of thought towards new ideas.
So they don't necessarily treat gay people badly in any way like that, but they just didn't want them to get married.
Yeah, that's how it used to be. But the Uniting Church, when the plebiscite was had, came out in support of it.
Okay. So they have no problems with gay couple coming to church.
No, they were the first church in Australia to actually conduct a gay marriage.
Oh, good to know.
And you can be a gay person, get married in the Uniting Church.
I mean, would that go for, women's rights as well, for example?
Oh yeah, there's women ministers within the Uniting Church. Women take on roles within the church. My mum was a lay preacher as well.
Yep.
She would do sermons. The women would hand out communion as often as the men would. Women said prayers and everything. So no, definitely. The United Church is very much equal rights.
Okay.
I mean, for the last my hometown area for the last, I think, 30 years has had a woman as head of the synod representative for that region.
Very cool.
So she's got direct voting power into what the church makes for decisions for the area. So yeah, very much open-minded and not very sexist in that sense. Certainly sexist more in the past, but certainly moved forwards with the times to become less sexist in the same way that it moved forwards in the time to become less homophobic and less transphobic. So the church is very open to that. I actually believe there is a trans minister in the church now.
Fair enough. That is pretty progressive for a church.
Yeah, that is pretty progressive. So
okay.
It's very hard to condemn them. Well, an example of progressiveness, and I'm going to have to drink after this one. When we were looking for support over doing stuff about what Cupcake, not Cupcake, no, other dude from the NFIB to stop him coming into Australia.
Oh.
The Uniting Church Synod for this area was prepared to speak up with us atheists who suggested this person shouldn't be allowed in the country.
Jesus.
So we have a church who is prepared to stand up on side with atheists to say, no, this minister is bad news.
Yeah. But that's not yeah. But I mean, it only takes different religious opinions to.
Oh, it does. But my point is that they would rather side with atheists than a bigoted extremist because they are more progressive and more in line with thinkings of how atheists think.
This goes with like
they're more secular
as well. Yeah.
Abortion as well. Not keen on abortion, but they do believe in
you don't.
That me. Yeah, I told you I was going to have to drink after this.
Yeah, I moved on, so.
Yeah,
it's hard to
we
say.
are for women's bodily autonomy, but we're also of the opinion that abortion shouldn't just be used as a form of birth control. There are valid reasons for abortion, like rape, or if the mother's going to die. There can be valid reasons for abortion. So we're not anti-abortion.
You can't just choose to have one because you
Ultimately, we think that life is more important than your right to not have to carry the child for 9 months, unless you're in danger or unless there's psychological scarring that can come from carrying that child. So there are good reasons why abortion should be allowed, but there's also good reasons why some women who want abortion should actually carry those children and adopt them. out.
Fair. Yeah. Okay. Last
And I'm
question.
going to break
Is
character again and have
little-
another drink because I actually still believe that.
Fair enough. You've broken a lot. I think ever since
I have. I can't help it.
I know. Well, once I first got you, you've given up. Basically, you were holding
I
off really
almost
strong
have now.
until then, and then you pretty much. It's all right. This is literally the last part of the question, and it's pretty relevant to us because we're Australian. But
Yep.
I have it in here for everybody. What is your opinion on the death penalty, or your religious opinion on the death penalty?
I know I'm kind of always been allowed to have my own opinion on that, which is no. I mean, for one thing, you don't give a chance to anybody to rehabilitate. You don't give a chance to those people to apologize to their victims or anything. I mean, not that anybody. I mean, of course, if it's murder, you can't apologize to the victim, but there are other victims other than the person murdered.
Yeah.
There's the family and that.
I know
You don't get a chance for that verbal closure when you flick a switch and take somebody's life away from them. So I'm kind of the opinion that that life should be treated as precious regardless of whose life it is. And that person should be, I mean, punished, sure. Put in prison, sure. But take their life from them, well, that's not necessarily a punishment to some people as well. So there's those elements of it, and I've kind of always had that opinion about it. So I don't know if there's a particular one about it that's pushed in the church. I can't ever remember it being talked about. But I have talked about it like with my dad and my mom, and they're sort of like similar to my opinion on it, that we don't support death penalty.
Admittedly, I'd be a bit worried if you had a different opinion. I mean, mainly because we're here in Australia and it's just not really something. Like,
it's not our thing, no.
It's not really our thing, no.
No.
So, that's understandable. The caveat there is, what about the death penalty when it's in the Bible? You know, all the people that have been put to death, the mass
It was a
murders,
different
the
time.
slaughtering.
It was a very different time. There was very different ways of doing things.
So when God does it, it's okay.
Yeah, well, there's the aspect that whilst God gave laws to man, God gave laws for man to use. So there is the argument there that these were probably the best that could be done at the time, given the situation for the early Israelites. I do think perhaps our morals are better now than what they were then, in that sense, and
So
perhaps that was the path that. Well, I don't know whether is it God's morals or is it that God had to give us those rules then, so that we could develop ourselves into a more moralistic being now.
God compromised the
this
word
is
that
the
he
path.
knew would be here for us for thousands of years, that we'd all listen to. You couldn't give us a little bit of decent advice.
But you've got to look at it from the point of view that you've got these Old Testament verses that give us the rules of God, and then you have Jesus come along and give us the golden rule. And if you take the golden rule literally, it says that some of these things that were written as rules for man probably aren't what God had intended for us.
So main focus is definitely on the gospel, like the
yes, very definitely a heavy focus on the gospels.
Okay. Fair enough. And he was, funnily enough, put to death.
He was. But that was also part of God's plan.
That's a strange plan.
Well, I could go back to the old God moves in mysterious ways. But, I mean, if you've got a situation where the wages for sin ultimately has to be death, and you can pay for that death in the death of a being that you've anointed to be your representation on earth, then you're paying for that death with divinity. So you're covering an awful lot of sin.
I don't even know how to respond to that. Actually, yep. All right. Guess what? We can end the game.
Yay!
You don't have to try and pretend to be theist, Jen.
That was difficult. Way more difficult than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, it's like that.
Wow.
And I mean, I really feel like after that first time you broke, you gave up.
Yeah. I got to that point where it's like, every question you're going to ask me, I need to say more than what I can just by being religious.
That's the thing. You've just got to be religious,
and it's really, really hard. I mean,
you're so confident at the start too.
I said to you, you're going to find it really hard to break me because I'm good at this. And it was like, no, I'm not. No, I'm really not. I started strong, but I fell down a big hole.
Oh, shit. Yeah, that was good, though. So how long ago was it that you left? I've got a few extra questions now that you're back to you.
Okay. Leaving religion, I probably didn't. Well, leaving Christianity was probably my early 30s. So 16 years ago. Then I spent about 5 years more as a spiritualist, where I often use this as an example that my faith was something akin to what the Minbari were in Babylon 5. Because I kind of believed that the universe itself was its own entity, and it was intellectual, but on a scale that we couldn't understand, and it gave birth to us as a way to discover and explore itself. So, which is I justified that by looking at images of like Laniakea, the larger structures of galactic clusters, and how they look like brains and neurons firing to say, here's a brain that's part of the universe. It's like, it's amazing how you'll try and justify what you believe. But eventually
there are theories that have come to fruition about the patterns in the universe
being very brain-like. Yes.
Yeah, it's not just brain-like. There have been a few different correlations. I can't remember the one that they were using. It was sort of a more broad sort of thing, but they managed to actually find new, I don't know, what was it? Not universes, fucking let's just call it star systems. I can't remember, solar systems and stuff like that. Like, using this strategy because they were able to predict, and I think it was within. It wasn't. Oh, it would have been some sort of vision. I can't remember now. I'll have to try and find that. But it was, there are actually certain patterns that seem to be universal. Which are quite fascinating.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that the universe is conscious. And even if it is, I would see that more as a deistic sort of thing than a normal type of religion. And as far as I'm concerned, any sort of deistic god is kind of irrelevant to us
you were
as
like
people.
Spiritualist
and also it doesn't
run you through another flashbacks.
Yeah. it's an interesting way that I used to think, but I mean, ultimately, I ended up watching people like Aaron Ra and Matt Dillahunty, and just realizing that I'm just reconciling back to having a faith in something, because I needed ties to that spirituality that I had as a child, because I had this desire to still have that, but I also realized that the Bible was crap.
Yeah.
So at that point, but oddly enough, it wasn't me being trans and transitioning that pulled me out of religion. I maintained my faith through that. I continued to be an active member of the church and all of that, and which just shows to show how progressive and forward-thinking the Uniting Church is as a church. And I'm very proud of them for that, that they can be like that. If every Christian church was like them, the world would be a shit ton better place.
yeah, no, it'd be at least better. That's for sure.
At least better. I mean, I'm not saying
So
it'd be perfect. There's still guilt that comes along with that. It is very easy for people, and it wasn't necessarily my parents who did it, but I had people within the congregation would say to me things like, "Oh, you're what you did there has just made Jesus so unhappy with you. You're going to have to try so much harder if you don't want to burn in hell."
yeah,
And I'm like, yeah, that's a really hard thing to deal with. And when you've had enough people say that through to you from a young kid and onwards, when you're coming to have to deal with something in your own life that challenges those preconceived rules of your religion, you're then absolutely terrified about where you're going to end up. You know, is me being intersex and transitioning, is that enough to make me burn forever? And if I have got an eternal soul, isn't that more important than this little tiny speck of time I have on earth? And I know so many trans people and intersex people who've had their lives destroyed by this conundrum, and gay and lesbian people as well, because it's a huge amount of guilt to throw on somebody for something you have no control over.
no, and
So
it's relative. It's
it's
pretty prolific amongst religions in general. It's
yeah,
really bad.
and to me that's inherently evil.
Yeah.
That's my concept of what's evil. And I'm not saying that the United
Is
Church does that to people now. They definitely don't, but they did when I was a kid.
yeah. Is there something that you would, looking back on yourself as a kid when you were religious, is there something about yourself that you regret or that you could have changed about yourself? Then,
Oh, I wish I'd known then what I knew now.
well,
I
speaking of
don't know
that, what
that.
would you tell
Although
your old
having
self?
known what I know now, I don't know how much of it I would change,
Yeah.
and that's always my conundrum. I mean, I've got two beautiful daughters, um, because of trying to delay my transition and having a normal life that I thought I had to have for God. So I don't know if I couldn't give them up. So would I
Is
change things? Probably not, but it'd be nice to know that I wasn't going to hell for these thoughts that
yeah.
were in my head or
Is
who I
that
was.
something that if you could go back, is that what you would tell yourself? That
Yeah, I think I'd tell
it's
myself that
okay,
the
you wouldn't
future
go to
can be
hell
better.
and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, you're not going to hell and the future will be better. I'd love to do that. Young me
Very
could have
cool.
really done with that. There are aspects of me as a teenager where I was suicidal that I could have done with having somebody giving me that advice. And that would have pulled me out of that. And I would have known that it was worth dealing with what I was dealing with now for what would happen in the future.
That's, I think, a really positive message for a lot of people, whether they're religious or not, going
Yeah.
through that. Yeah. Okay. Oh, I did miss one question. I don't think it's going to be
Go
too
for
relevant
it. How
though.
do I have to be?
No, it's still your news. So what
Okay.
political views have changed since you left?
Oh.
You didn't have too many bad ones as it was, so I'm not.
No, see my dad was very much a Labour Party man,
Yeah.
and in a sense very left wing. Um so he was very progressive and very forward thinking in his ways. Mum was more centrist and a swinging voter, but still very progressive. Still is. As you know, I did a video with my mum, so yeah,
Mm.
she is
Oh,
kind
you
of
done a
awesome. I
pretty.
mean, Dad died a few years ago, but yeah, they both instilled a sense of wonder for the universe and critical thinking, which is probably what ended up me getting to being an atheist, because they encourage critical thinking so much. So well
Yeah.
done, Mum and Dad, you got me out of religion.
Oh
um,
well. Yeah.
oh
Cool.
well, yeah.
Fair call.
Yeah, I've sidetracked where my train of thought was going then.
No,
Yeah,
well,
on my
I didn't
religious
think you'd
ideas,
have.
I
Yeah.
think I'm while I don't know that I'm more progressive now, I'm more vocal in my progressiveness than I was.
People
So
are
I am
outspoken.
more prepared to stand up for what I believe in and shout out for the underdog, stand up for LGBTQ plus people and have my say. And I wasn't prepared to do that until I'd accepted who I was and started transition. I just wasn't prepared to do that. So that's something that changed whilst I was still in the religion, but changed even more so as I left religion, as I went into spirituality, and later on as an atheist, as a secular atheist. I really moved into an area where I look, if shit's going down wrong, I'm going to be there and support people who need it, because I realize I'm in a position of privilege. Even amongst trans people, I'm in a position of privilege. I lost one. Well, didn't even lose that family member. I've got one family member who's a bit of an ass to me, but I can still go to Christmas with them. It's not the most comfortable Christmas, but I can still do that. But the rest of my family are freaking awesome, and we're still really close, and all that. So I didn't lose family by that. In fact, as my mum says in the video, she is more disappointed by the fact that I became an atheist than she ever was that I transitioned. Which is absolutely amazing and a good testament to how the United Church has changed its thinking. But not disappointed. Disappointed in that she's still concerned for my eternal soul. But she's hopeful that when I die, I will bow before Jesus and accept him again. So that's how she reconciles that. And thankfully, her faith lets her do that, so she doesn't have to stress too much about it. And if she's right, and if I do die and end up in front of Jesus, I probably have questions, but I might bow the knee and go into heaven, because maybe I might have questions about the validity of some of the crap.
Yeah, I mean, we'd have to have a powwow and stuff.
But I'd have to have a good powwow about that. Yeah, and some of that shit in the Old Testament is pretty crappy, and you're going to be having to be explaining yourself there. But I'd have the conversation. I'm open-minded.
Yeah, fair call. That's it. Yeah, I mean, that's what it is to be skeptical. It's not necessarily to just not believe everything. It's to be like, no, well, I got to ask the questions and find out everything. Like, I want to know the answer to all these things.
And I don't see how you could, unless, I mean, as I've often said, the God that's portrayed in the Bible is a fucking asshole. Ultimately, that's how I perceive it now. So, if there is a God, and that God created us to be this nice, to give us an opportunity to get eternal life and ultimately be this good person that a lot of Christians think, that I don't think that God's going to care if I challenge it. And if the God is the type of God that cares that I challenge it, then I think I'd rather have an eternity away from that God.
Yeah, that's it. I think a lot of people have that opinion too, where it's like, if that's the God that you'd have to bow to, fuck off.
Yeah, I'm like, fuck off. I'm not prepared to do that. I'd rather not. And if some of the other religions are right that your family get you erased from their memory because they don't want to have that pain in heaven, well, so be it. I'm not causing them any anguish by saying fuck off to God. Exactly. The only person I could possibly cause anguish to then is me. So I'm like,
apparently not even then, because it depends if you go to hell, I suppose. But
anyway. Yeah, well, I mean, if I get burnt forever in hell, but I mean, in all honesty, if the devil is so bloody powerful that he can turn Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and God couldn't curse him to walk in his belly, but yet later on he's not crawling on his belly. I know it's supposed to be the snake, but a lot of people think it's the devil. Then obviously God's power over the devil isn't all that great, so he's not all bloody powerful. The devil has quite a bit of power himself.
It's true.
And the fact that this has to be this whole big fight instead of God just saying bye-bye, flick him away.
Yeah.
That can't happen, so God's not all powerful. So in the scheme of things, who knows? Maybe the devil's place is the party place where we're going to get lots of booze, have lots of fun, and lots of sex.
That sounds like a way to end it.
It does.
And as a segue, I think it's a good time to end it. I think we're pretty much done. I want to thank you for coming on, Jen. Do you want to tell everybody where to find you again, and then we'll
can do that.
Wrap it
I'm
up.
Jen from Jen's Little Corner. You find me on my Jen's Little Corner YouTube channel or on as Gentle Corner on Twitter. I'm assuming NotJah will have the links down in the description.
I will.
So yeah, come and follow me. I usually fight with bigots and idiots on Twitter. Quote science stuff and point out why people are wrong, although occasionally I'm wrong, which is always humorous. I also do science and LGBTQ videos on my channel. I also try to raise other people's voices and have discussions with interesting people and do videos where I debunk stupid, like flat earthers and anti-vaxxers and fools like that. So if you're interested in any of that sort of stuff, come and check me out and see what you think. I also swear a lot, so if you don't like lots of swearing, yeah, I'm probably not the
they
best
won't be
person to
here
follow.
if they don't like swearing. Come on.
Well, that's true, because that's the Aussie way.
Exactly. All right, everyone. You heard it. Go check out that link. Should be below. Make sure you subscribe. And I'm pretty sure a lot of you already have, but get in there. There's a lot that haven't. And everyone knows who I am, obviously. NotJah Witness with the NotJah Witnessy things. This has been Atheist Flashbacks. I want to thank you all very much for watching. Thank you again, Jen. And everyone, stay safe. Catch you around. You'll be paying and drink alcohol from their body. Maybe you're more interested in sitting on your imaginary underworld apostate's face, or just stomp me to the curb for writing such horrendous lines. Nachos go great with beer. Now you can and more with these fantastic overpriced items from the great range on sale in NotJah's Underworld Market. Your nachos are always best with beer. Pick up your very own upside down pillow, throw an apostate on your stretch pants, or slap on some yowie socks and just walk all over me. Your nachos always go best with beer. So grab Australian mug, wrap your lips around it, and suck dry those glorious liquids. Everything in stock is limited because I get bored and change it up all the time, so get yours now. As always, ensure to thoroughly beer your nacho. Go to teesprings.com/store/nachos Underworld Market to grab your very own nacho now.
I believe in Jah, I believe in Jah.